I made a bitoroidal transformer, BITT, bit for short, even though there's no toroids on it. And you take a basic three-phase AC transformer, and the primary is the middle one, and I happen to have 12 multifilar winds, and I hooked them in series to raise the ohms so I can pump 120 volts into here and it doesn't get hot or anything. And there's two secondaries, this one and this one over here, and I ran those in series. And the multifilers in the secondaries, I connected them 6 of those 12 wires in parallel, and then another 6 in parallel, and then I connected them in series, and I ran it over here and did the same thing over here. So it's a step-down transformer. You put in 120 volts and you have about 15 volts out of it. And the idea is this is going to run an inverter and from the grid. So, and then the inverter is going to run the rotaverter and whatever you want. So this is a BITT transformer. Not everybody calls them that. Hector has a better name for them. Hector doesn't like these shunt bars here, but I kind of like them. Tim Tron's got these to go quite a bit over unity, and when I look at the phase shift going into it, there's such a huge phase shift that it becomes over unity when you take into account power factor in AC. My best is like 13 times over unity if you take into account power factor. And it takes a lot of amps to shove that phase shift over to 90 degrees, and that's what you want, because then your power factor is like 0. But anyways, so the way it works, if anybody wants to know, you put in power into the primary and it flows into the secondaries, and every time there's a polarity change in the AC, this is all AC, this thing, every time there's a polarity change you get a back EMF, a lurch back EMF of a magnetic field going backwards, and it's very strong, and usually that will pile itself back into the primary and raise your draw because it lowers the impedance, all this magnetic energy at every change of polarity in the AC. It's kind of like flyback, but it's currents, not voltage. And so the idea is the back EMF, instead of going back into the primary, it goes following this shunt bar, and it wants to go back over to the opposite secondary. And the same thing happens over here at every polarity change of the AC. The back EMF, instead of going into the primary, raising your draw when you load it, because you get the back EMF when those secondaries are loaded. You know, if you don't load them, you don't see anything. But during loading, you know, you put a resistive load on them or inductive load or whatever, that is when you create this back EMF. Now the back EMF goes to the opposite secondary, and it creates more power. It reinforces what is being made. It doesn't make draw go up extra when the coils are loaded, because it doesn't want to go back to the primary. It wants to shoot over to the opposite secondary. So see, there's kind of a gap right here. So it just goes right over the secondary, guided by these shunt bars. These are just steel I got at Home Depot, and I cut them up and stuffed them on there. So I have a shunt bar above and a shunt bar below. And a feature I kind of came up with is these skirts where you actually catch some of it coming out sideways too. So here it is. I did a lot of work making the secondaries exactly the same ohmage, and they put out exactly the same voltage. And then I run them in series. I'm going to try them in parallel later on, but right now I want to check this out in series. And from my testing, you're not going to see anything unless you have a scope hooked to the input to this and you look at the power factor. And you want to get it so it's 90 degrees phase shift going into it. Tim Tron's, the ones he built, he adds more and more load to it, and the input doesn't change. And his are pretty dramatic. And so this is what I built, and I'll be testing it. Like I said, you're not going to see anything unless you have a scope hooked up to it. And right now, if I hook it to 120 volts AC, 60 hertz, the primary right here, the secondary will have about 15 to 16 volts AC. And that's what my target was for this. And I want to run one of my little stat power inverters with this and see if I can get something going on with the phase shift. My testing, I've done a lot of testing with these about a year ago, longer than that. If you want to look at my videos about a year ago, the BITT transformers. And the best I got was about 13 times over unity, but that's with the power factor taken into account, which was like almost at 90 degrees for the input. And then the output is real. The input, you can call it reactive power, while the output is real power, because you have like a resistive load on the output. But so that's what these kind of do technically, is they convert reactive power to real power, sort of. And there we go. Okay, thanks for watching.